Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'd like to call the July meeting of the Edgecombe County Commissioners to order. Mr. Evans, safety instructions, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call on Ms. Natalie Best, our Deputy County Manager, to give us our safety instructions.
Good evening. To provide for the safety of those attending this meeting, please listen to the following instructions in case of an emergency. First, please take a moment to note where your exits are. If an emergency arises that prompts us to evacuate, please exit this room in a quick and orderly manner through one of the two doors to your right, and then proceed to the nearest stairwell, directions to which are included by the exit signs. Once you exit the building, we ask that you safely cross Granville Street, which is the street that runs beside our building, to our parking lot to be safely away from the building. Our staff will provide additional direction and assistance as needed. In the case of a tornado warning, please exit this room into the hallway where we will all remain until it is safe to exit. In any event of an active shooter in the building, if there is an accessible escape path, please run and try to evacuate the premises. If you can't evacuate, find a place to hide where you are less likely to be found and lock any doors that you can. And as a last resort, and only if your life is in imminent danger, please fight. Our staff will continue to provide additional assistance on what to do. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Prayer, Ms. Harris.
Dear Heavenly Father, I do thank you for another day of life, health, and strength. Lord, we thank you for the citizens that are here, those who may be listening to us. Lord, we ask you to continue to give us guidance that we may stay on one accord and do what is best for the citizens of Edgecombe County. This we ask in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. At this time, in your agenda package, we have the minutes from our previous meeting on June the 2nd, and I think we also have at our desk a copy of special call meetings. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of our June 2nd?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. We also have at your desk minutes of our special call meeting of June the 23rd. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. Also sees some slight changes in our agenda. At this time, we will have public petitions. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to clarify for the folks that are here tonight, some of the folks in the audience may have been coming expecting a public hearing for the Bridge Solar Project. At our June meeting, you all called for a public hearing to be held tonight. Our staff followed up with Bridge Solar to inform them the public hearing has been called. We have had no communication from anyone from the project after multiple attempts, both call and email. So we've had no communication from them. Therefore, we take it that being that they are withdrawing their special use permit application. So we will not be having that public hearing tonight. But certainly, if there's anyone here tonight that wanted to speak about that or anything else, now would be the time, because we will not be having that public hearing tonight, just to clarify.
And if that comes to life again, we will call another public hearing again?
Yes, sir.
That's okay. Is there anybody here to speak about any matter at this time? Please come forward, ma'am, and state your name and address for the public record.
My name is Kathy Stallings. I live on Battleboro Leggett Road, and I'm here about solar. What's new?
Hear about what now?
Solar, so what's new?
Okay, yes, ma'am.
You know, I question, do you know the definition of insanity? And that's insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And sometimes I think when I get up here, I am a prime example of insanity, because so far it hasn't worked for this solar to go away. Anyway, I walk every day and I think and I try to listen to what God would have me do, but sometimes I have to really listen, because sometimes my hearing is not so much acute and I miss the whisper altogether. But I want to rewind to a March meeting, and there was a gentleman whose name I cannot remember. He presented something to the board for approval. I can't remember his name, as I said, nor the specifics of his request, but what I do remember is what he wanted was to get the scouts into the schools. This is such an incredible program for so many young men who need guidance, especially those who lack a positive male role model in their lives. Both of my sons are Eagle Scouts, and I know what it took for them to get that rank. I remember the badges they earned, the lessons that they learned during their tenure in the scouting program. And so you're thinking, so what does this have to do with my stand on solar, which all of you know what it is? So instead of being blinded by the glitter of what you believe all that money would do, think about what the impact of losing farmland, wildlife habitat, jobs, damaging farmland so that it can never be used again. Once again, you know all of this. No one can say for absolute certainty that the farmland can be reclaimed as quickly as they say. They apparently have never lived on a farm or only in the world of academia, where they study an issue. They get their PhDs and masters by doing research. They speculate and don't always get it right. I am not dismissing the education these individuals have. I just don't think a research facility is always the best to judge all things. Case in point, when my oldest son was working on his master's, imagine that, he was privy to a group of PhDs in a meeting trying to make heads or tails out of a map of farmland in eastern North Carolina. They did not understand how fields could be so irregular or what those odd-looking boundaries could be. They argued over it. They insisted there was no way these were fields to be farmed. My son told them that they were accustomed to the Midwest, where all fields were the prescribed 640-acre parcels with nice, neat, square fields. He further explained that what they were seeing were either ditches or hedgerows or where tractors plowed as far as they could and then they turned around because of going into a wetland. They thought he had completely lost his mind until his advisor told them he needed to listen to him, as this was the type of land he had grown up on, and he knew of what he spoke. It makes a difference when someone understands the geography and the topography of the area. So shift your thinking and imagine a county that engages the youth. 4-H is one organization. FFA is another organization. The scouting program, all they can offer many different avenues for young people to explore. Mentoring programs and the like can be positive. I would love to see this county look beyond solar panels, which I see as destructive in the end. I would love to see this county, instead of looking at the ways, instead the county to look into ways that involve our young people. We need to educate them. We need to challenge them, because the future leaders of this county or another or beyond. Are you aware that North Carolina is number 2 in the nation in farmland loss? Solar will only exacerbate this loss. With solar panels in 20 to 30 years, they'll be obsolete. They will need to be dismantled. It will cost something to be removed, so who pays? The solar company is only leasing the land from the farm owner or landowner, whichever the case may be. So does the landowner or the county dispose of the panels? Or are they just left up as a reminder of what we did wrong? I was recently at a planning board meeting. One of the members had a question. Who benefits from these panels? The landowner and the solar company are the two that benefit, not the people in the county, other than taxes. Another question, again at the planning board, is how much are these people paid for leasing the land? It was a young man, I think he was from Rocky Mount. He said, well, he'd been in Indiana, and they were paying between $100 to $750 an acre. This isn't Indiana, folks. This is North Carolina. Some of the prices here being offered are anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 an acre. So he's coming with erroneous information. There were 2 young ladies representing the county at the planning board meeting. Why, I'm not sure. One did not live in Edgecombe County, the other who works for the county has only been here for 3 years. I'm not knocking them, but again, they're not Edgecombe County people. They don't know the county. Another misconception the county has, or its citizens may have, the solar companies, which are LLCs, have no assets. They have no money. If they were to go bankrupt, you can't sue them because they don't have any money. What they do is they constantly sell their companies from one group to another who are looking for investments. So therefore, you don't have the bankruptcy. And that makes you think, doesn't it? The two which were overturned this, back in or earlier this year, they're on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So somebody has already bought 2 or 3 times that we're on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange with those groups. Why were the last 2 solar projects which came before the commissioners who made their decision, why were they overturned by a judge? Sounds to me like they don't think those of us in Edgecombe County are bright enough to make our own decisions. It seems that judge finds it necessary to hold the hands of the commissioners as they make a decision. Who maintains the sites? Who will cut and maintain the vegetative growth underneath the panels? It all costs. The landowner, the solar company, or the county. And don't get me started on telling us that sheep can graze under our panels. Do you know why a sheep is born with its head looking down? They're looking for a place to die. That's what the vets will tell you. That's what a vet told us. I know. We used to raise sheep. We buried a whole lot of them. So we are in the wrong geographical area for sheep. We made a wrong investment with those sheep. You do realize the panels need to be washed periodically. The more dust that the panel accumulates, the less efficient it becomes. I know this is not California, but when my oldest son lived out there, and they have a lot of rooftop panels, okay? The homeowner was responsible for washing his own panels, and it made a difference in the efficiency, and they watched their bills go up and down. The more dust, the less efficient, the cleaner it was, the better it was. I could go on and on. So imagine what this county could do in 20 to 30 years in investing in our posterity. Isn't our youth worth investing in? That can be something that keeps on giving. I'd rather invest in something living and breathing that has the potential to give back. Yes, there will be a cost, but it's an investment in Edgecombe County's future. Currently, we rank number 18 in the 100 counties, and that's not from the top. It's from the bottom. Some other polls show Edgecombe is at the bottom of the state. However, if you look at these rankings, depending on what is being measured, those numbers will change. There's some that'll tell you it's at the bottom, and it's a sliding scale depending on what data you're looking at. So it's what's being measured. Wouldn't it be a feather in our cap if we could start climbing the ladder toward the top? There are resources in this county that can be tapped into to encourage and entice our young people to get off of assistance and get a job. Those who can need to work or go to school or prove they are trying to get off of assistance. Why not look at things at the community college? Again, you've got Scouting 4-H, 4-H, FFA, and you've also got internships possibly with area businesses. So it's more looking at getting the whole county invested, not just 1 or 2. This county, along with every North Carolina county, needs to get our reading and math scores up. The education in the nation is abysmal. So how can we, instead of investing in solar, which only benefits a small number of landowners, let's invest in one of our greatest resources, our population. Solar panels will suck the life out of our land. They will not provide jobs over a long period of time. They will provide money for landowners, and that does not spread the wealth among the population. I am not condoning a continual state of welfare, rather proposing a state of workfare. If one does nothing all day long, how do you stop doing nothing? There's no better feeling than one of accomplishment after a job is done and done well. Besides, one is too tired to get into trouble. That according to my late husband's grandmother. So I'm in favor of extending the moratorium indefinitely on solar farms. I just would ask the commissioners not to move too quickly. Thank you for your attention, and I know it was long, but I said what I wanted to. Thank you.
Well, if you stick around, I think on our next scheduled appointment, we do have an update on what we intend to do with that, okay? Is there anybody else to speak to public petitions? Please come forward. Oh. Good evening.
I'm Kimberly Gorham Page. I live on Seven Bridges Road. I'll be very brief. First of all, I would encourage you to extend the moratorium. I pretty much beg you to extend it. This has gone too quickly. The meetings I've been, and I totally agree with Kathy Stallings and her reasoning and her, but I'll be very brief. I've been at all the stakeholders meetings that we've had, and most recently, the 3-hour planning board meeting that we had, that we went over all the little items and everything, and we went through every little item. That lasted till, I think, 9:15, something like that. I have a 3x3 map in my car that shows the thousands of acres already around me within 5 miles that have solar panels. You would be shocked. I went to the planning department. We sat down, 2 of them sat down with me. We pulled it up. You wouldn't believe it. Seven Bridges Road, Battleboro-Leggett Road, Old Battleboro Road. You've got them. City of Rocky Mount just approved 3 plats where Battleboro-Leggett Road, Old Battleboro Road, and Seven Bridges, that junction there. You wouldn't believe the thousands and hundreds of acres that have already been approved. That's going to happen. And you won't be able to get to my house without driving through all of this. And my family has been on that farm for over 100 years. And then we're going to be surrounded by this. The one that most recently the court overturned, that's going to be pretty much right across the road from me. That's going to go from, it's hard for people to imagine what it's going to look like. It's going to go from pretty much right down from Old Battleboro Road, down Seven Bridges Road, slam to Morning Star Church Road. And right there, this young couple that's only like 35, 40 years old, just built a really nice house at the intersection of Morning Star Church Road and Seven Bridges Road. They're going to walk out their front door, and that's what they're going to see, the corner of they're going to see solar panels. It's just really sad to me. So I encourage you to please extend the moratorium. And like I said, I've been in on these meetings, and I've expressed my opinion. Y'all have seen me too. And so I really think we need to look at this and see what we need to do. I really think we need to put a hold on these solar panels, these bills coming into this. And like Kathy said, with the rent, I know we were told wrong in that meeting about how much these farmers are getting for that rent. I know that. I talked to somebody and I wrote it down. They're getting paid way more than the planning board was told. So I respectfully request you to extend the moratorium. Thank you for your time.
Is there anybody else to speak? Please come forward, sir. State your name and address for the public record.
Good evening. My name is Jet Webb, 3535 Big Pen Road, Tarboro, North Carolina, out toward Canita. I would just like to keep it fairly short and simple. Probably one of the few ones here that are pro-solar. And when I say that, I'm pro-Edgecombe County. I'm a farm boy, born in 1980. Grew up farming, family farm in Canita, and farmed all the way through my mid-20s. Farming is tough, and had to pursue other ventures. One of them that I got involved with some of my land was the Canita solar farm. I do have land involved in that, and I have no problems with it whatsoever because it's allowed me to diversify and to do other things with my money away from farming, which right now is looking to be in dire straits, especially with row cropping. We get a lot of conjecture here and a lot of things that are very emotionally driven. What I'd like to discuss are some irrefutable facts. Being involved with the Canita site probably 15 years now, which is back when they built it about 15 years ago, it can 100% be restored back to cropland. When people say that they can't, it's because they don't know what they're talking about. To the point of there's not even gravel driveways that's been put through the farm. There's not one concrete slab poured out there. Everything is I-beams that were driven in, and they can be pulled out with excavators. And it can be restored back 100%. That was what was at my heart, is the farmer and going back to the cropland. It does not mess up the soil. It's 100% inert materials, which is glass, aluminum, and iron, okay? 3 of the most recyclable products that there are known to mankind. As far as bonding goes, I was on the stakeholders committee. We had a couple of meetings. I even attended the planning board meeting, and I will say this. I was there as a landowner, okay, representing landowners' rights. What I don't want to see is the landowners' rights or the taxpayers here in Edgecombe County, those rights be infringed upon or impeded. What we need is industry to come to the county. It was unfortunate events with QVC that burned down. We lost that. You know, the Chinese tire factory, the battery plant that was coming, I don't think that's going to come to fruition. What is knocking on the door are the solar companies that want to build here. Why do they want to build here? Because we're in the coastal plains, we're flat, and it's conducive to solar. I will say this, right by the United States Department of Agriculture, there are 150,000 tillable crop acres in Edgecombe County. We rank 6th in the state with the most amount of tillable crop land. If a farmer owns that land and decides that he wants to take a portion of that to put into solar, that should be his right to do so. Chad Meadows with Code Right, wealth of information. When it comes to the general statutes, when it comes to where things are at legislatively speaking, in the House and the Senate on the state side, could not be more knowledgeable. However, through the stakeholders meeting, it basically boiled down to what were the stakeholder committee members, me being one of them, what were our top 3 concerns? One of them was the size of the solar, one of them was better maintenance of the solar sites, and one was how do we, let's talk about ag land mitigation. However, what was proposed to the planning board was 16 items, some of them never even discussed in the stakeholders meeting, with an addition of 4 or 5 others that could be thrown in there, more and more regulations, a lot of which, and Ms. Kim Page over here will agree with me on it, and she's against the solar. We both, after one of the meetings, were just blown back by, I was like, wait, we didn't even discuss this in the stakeholders meeting, yet that's what Code Right come up with. I'm in agreement overall to say extend the moratorium, and I'm pro-solar. You would think I'd be against the moratorium. I think we should extend the moratorium, not indefinitely, but extend it so that we can get more bare-bone facts about this thing, right? I want to be fair to everybody. When I talk to people that are against the solar here in the county, 8 or 9 out of 10 simply just don't like how they look, all right? That's easy. More rows of trees. Let's do a little further setback. Let's go with fences that you can't see through. It was mentioned earlier, driving down the highway and not liking how they look, I get that. But we also got to look at other contenders here like tax base, which the county so desperately needs. We're 8th in the county. We rank among the highest of the taxes. We got some of the highest unemployment. I don't know. I don't want to squash it out completely. I think we need to keep all options on the table. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else to speak at public petitions? Hearing none, at this time, moving on to scheduled appointments, Mr. Evans.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We are very delighted tonight to be able to recognize the graduates of the very first Edgecombe Works Hands-On Academy program. I'd like to invite Dr. Greg McLeod, president of Edgecombe Community College, to come forward. He's going to tell us a little bit about the program and recognize the graduates.
Mr. Webb, you step down with them too. Okay. Just when you get ready to make the presentations, go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners, County Manager Evans, other county administrators, residents, guests, and visitors. It's our delight and joy to be with you all. Hope you're having a wonderful summer and staying cool with this heat. So as County Manager Evans mentioned, he mentioned the Hands-On Skills Academy. So as you all know, I've been before you all with previous academies that have graduated, and those were the Office Skills Academy. And so we're proud to bring before you all the Hands-On Skills Academy graduates. Not all of them could be here. Perhaps they're out there using their hands-on skills to do something productive in our community, and hopefully they are. But we do have a few of the 11 who graduated in this cohort. But as you can imagine, with the hands-on, it takes a certain kind of passion, takes a certain amount of grit and determination to participate in something like that, because they're doing something that most of us don't have to do on a regular basis, and that is utilize hands-on skills. And so these graduates completed training in a number of different fields, and so they're ready to come out to your house and take care of you if you need be. Now, if it requires something that requires a licensed person, make sure you call it a licensed person. But they did learn through this academy, and hopefully I got it right, Selwyn, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, construction, and forklift training. So imagine those skills together, how valuable you are, not just at your workplace, but all around, even at home. So those are valuable skills to have, and so we're pleased to partner with the county and County Manager Evans to provide that for our residents and for your employees. So at this time, and using a term that I heard earlier, I would say these graduates did a job done well. So I'm pleased to present to you from your community college, Edgecombe Community College, from your president, Greg McLeod. Standing with me will come up is Mr. Selwyn Spence, who helps to oversee and organize our continuing education classes, but also with him, Kevin Strickland, who's an instructor who covers a number of different trades areas. And the feedback that we received from the graduates earlier tonight was singing his praises with the great instruction that he provided. So I will let them say a few words, and then they're going to announce the names. And just for the record, we want to announce all 11 of them, so you would know who they are, but then bring up those who graduated, and if we can shake their hands, and then maybe pose for a picture like we did with the Office Skills Academy.
I'm going to ask Mr. Webb to assist with that.
Oh, yes, absolutely, and we'll invite Mr. Webb to do that as well. So
I am Selwyn Spence, and I helped put this class together. And it's a very special class to me because we started out, normally, we teach one trade at a time, but this proposal came up and we were able to offer various trade skills. So I'm very proud of all the 11 people that continued and pushed through.
So come down and shake hands, and I'm gonna come up here. So he's gonna call names and hand it to them as they come up, and they're gonna shake our hand.
So we have 5 that we wanted to recognize that made it, and the other 6 didn't quite make it, but I would like for
Didn't make it here.
Yeah, they graduated. They graduated.
Yeah,
they
you
didn't
better,
make it.
you better finish that sentence. You better mess that up, okay?
Yeah.
You better hand that certificate on out.
And if I could ask, as you come around, if you will, go and stand behind the commission, we want to take a brief photo with all of you.
Our first will be Noel Keck.
And no, she gonna raise some chickens.
We got Joseph Scott. We have Donna Pittman. We have Emma Darden. And Sylvia Davenport.
Let's give them all a hand.
And for the 6 that weren't here, county employee Gregory Pittman. We have Marquetta Dickens. Brian Perkins. County employee Kevin Dickens. Kimberly Lawson. And Derek Bailey.
And ladies and gentlemen, just so that you will know, these are your tax dollars, and one of our petitioners spoke to that, and we call this hands-on training, and this is something that any of you can participate in, all kinds of training, and Dr. McLeod, the classes are based on what you want to do, so a word of mouth, the classes can be ongoing. I mean, in terms of they were developed.
Keep planning more.
Keep planning more so that any of you can get hands-on in any of the skills that you would like to get it in. And this is your tax dollars at work. Correct. Thank you.
Congratulations, everybody.
You can stay if you like, or
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, this program is a part of a larger suite of programs that fall under the umbrella of what we call Edgecombe Works. The goal of it all is to try to give our staff and our citizens more access to these wonderful training programs that we have at our community college. So again, I want to say thank you to Dr. McLeod and his team for making these programs happen for us.
go right ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
All right. Next, under scheduled appointments, we have tonight Mr. Durbin Spell, our Director of Planning and Inspections, along with Chad Meadows with Code Right Planners, and they're going to come and give you an update on the work of the stakeholder group that you've heard about already tonight and recommendation for a path forward.
Good evening. Okay. And as you heard, we had 2 stakeholder meetings, one in March and one in May, to discuss our current solar energy conversion system, UDO language, and as well as look into ways or suggestions from the stakeholders group as far as what we could do to improve that language, in which we got a lot of suggestions regarding that. From those meetings, we was able to come up with 16 recommendations for changes, in addition to another 6 or 7 to take a look at. And those recommendations were taken to the planning board for their discussion. And that was in their June meeting. The planning board looked over the recommendations. There was some that they felt very good with, and others they felt like more time is needed to review and research those recommendations. At the end, the planning board for the recommendation that the Board of Commissioners do consider extending the moratorium. With that said, I present Mr. Chad Meadows, and he'll go into the details with the recommendations that were made, in addition to relevant state legislation that affects what we can and can't do at this time.
Thank you, Durbin. Good evening. Mr. Chair, Mr. Members. I'm Chad Meadows. I am principal of Code Right Planners, and I draft development codes for a living. In fact, I have had the pleasure of working with you for many, many years now. In fact, I was the main architect of your current UDO. which was adopted in November of '21. And I've participated in 4 rounds of amendments with your staff. And so I've also been asked to work with them on your solar energy conversion standards, which I'm sort of sad to say I consider myself a student of regulation. When we redrafted your development ordinance back in 2021, we did not change your, at the time, current regulations because they were new. Thus, they were carried forward. And it is for that reason that I think we are here tonight and that we've experienced some of the challenges that we've seen in the past few months. So, I was going to do a PowerPoint. I don't know if that could be brought up. That might help move us along quickly. And who's driving?
Jason, is there a clicker back there? I don't see it up here.
Jason can drive, no problem. I'll just ask him to
There you
advance.
go.
That's
Tell him
great.
there you go.
That's very good. And let's go ahead on to the next slide, please. Go ahead, Jason. Oh. Thank you. All right. Very, very quickly tonight, I understand you guys have a full agenda, so we'll move this right along. 3 parts. We'll talk a little bit about background. We'll talk about the text amendment ideas that were derived through the stakeholder meetings, and then we'll talk about next steps. As you know, there was a solar farm moratorium that was commenced in November of last year. At that time, your staff endeavored to reach out to the solar community and to affected parties in Edgecombe County about this issue. They are to be commended for this effort. Their work has been outstanding. I do a lot of work with a lot of local governments across North Carolina. These meetings were well put together, they were well run, they were well advertised, and the results from them I think have been successful, and I hope that you'll agree. So I've been very pleased to be involved in this project. We had our first stakeholder meeting on March 24th. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relevant parts of these meetings in a moment. We had the second one on May 13th, and then, as everybody mentioned, we were in front of the planning board in June or last month, rather. A couple observations about your current regulations. Before I talk about the stakeholder meetings, let me just share some of these insights. Number one, right now today in your current ordinance, Level 2 and Level 3 solar energy conversion uses are allowed in every single zoning district, okay? So there is no guidance in your UDO about which zoning districts are or are not appropriate for these kinds of facilities, okay? It is typical not to allow industrial scale solar facilities in residential zoning districts across most local governments in the state, okay? Here, they are allowed in all of your zoning districts. Further, you use the special use permit process to consider these applications. Special use permit processes are quasi-judicial in nature. They are also presumptively valid. What that means is, if a use meets the standards in your ordinance, it must be approved. You may not deny it. It is presumptively valid, presumptively appropriate to be in that district. This approach puts you at a disadvantage, okay? Sorry, I didn't want to go that fast. Why does it put you at a disadvantage? One, it limits the ability of people to participate. If you want to participate in the discussion, you have to have standing, okay? We're not going to go into all of that material. Just know that there's a bar to pass in order to participate. You cannot discuss the case amongst yourselves. It can only be discussed during the hearing. Very different than a legislative kind of a decision. And then finally, there's no negotiation. That's not permitted. The quasi-judicial procedure stops you from doing that. So you're using a process that presumes these things are allowed wherever they're proposed. Your current regulation allows them everywhere, and there's no opportunity for discussion about it. That's not good practice. And we would suggest that you consider some other ways to do that. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. What we've heard through the stakeholder meetings, and likely what you've heard, is that there are concerns about these uses in Edgecombe County. They focus on appearance, they focus on adequate maintenance, they focus on impacts to community character, and that includes some lost farmland. And that's what we're hearing. I'm sure that's what you've heard. And those are the things that we're trying to address here. In addition to putting the county in a better position, on a better footing, when it comes to consideration of these applications. Because frankly, you're at a disadvantage using the quasi-judicial procedure, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what was done. As I mentioned, in March of this year, we had stakeholder meeting 1. There were, 20 people, 25 people, plus minus. Great attendance. We talked about the purpose of the meeting. We talked about the regulatory overview. We talked about current facilities in the county. We also asked everybody in the room to go around the table and share their thoughts about pros and cons of solar generally. We also asked people to list their ideas for what changes might be necessary in terms of preparing the regulation. This is a list of 30 of their recommendations. This didn't come from staff. This didn't come from me. This came from the stakeholders. This was distributed to every stakeholder. And what was done was that we asked them to select the top 3 among this list of 30 for us to focus on. Okay? And that's what was done. What we got was participation by 5 stakeholders. Guess how many suggestions they made? 16. Okay. We had a second meeting on May 13th, to talk in more detail about those 16 things that came up. All right? What was done in light of that conversation was the preparation of this memorandum, which was sent to staff. I assume you guys have seen this. This was also shared with Planning Commission on the 16th. This is a set of recommendations that were assembled based on the conversations that we had. Are there topics or things in here that go above and beyond what was discussed? Yes. Why? Because we did not discuss the county's position in terms of a review process for these kinds of applications. All right, that would be something that would be more appropriate to discuss with Planning Board and with this body, not stakeholders. Okay, so I want to be fair to Mr. Webb, who said there's things in here that we didn't talk about. That's absolutely true. That is absolutely right. There are aspects of good ordinance hygiene that we did not cover with the stakeholder committee. That doesn't mean that they're bad things or that we shouldn't discuss them. As your consultant, the person who's drafted development regulations for 33 years, I provided my suggestions for how you should change your regulation. And I'd like to talk about those now with you very, very quickly. I want to focus on primarily what the Planning Board said in response to these 16 things. The first of them was revising the zoning districts where allowed, suggesting the possibility of using a conditional rezoning approach instead of a special use permit process. Planning Board supported that idea for the reasons that I gave you before. The second topic was changing the procedure for establishment of solar farms in general, and following that, perhaps we should consider using a conditional rezoning process. This was also agreed to by the Planning Board. It would definitely be my suggestion for you. By the way, your staff has reviewed this memorandum, and we have discussed this material with your attorney. Okay, this is not far from how other local governments handled this issue in North Carolina. In fact, what we're suggesting is probably more consistent with how it's done in other places. Number 3 was adding requirements for development agreements. Okay? Several things that came up during the discussions with the stakeholders were notions of community benefit agreements, voluntary negotiation between the county and a solar provider to provide things like training for local workers, to provide scholarships, to provide things for Edgecombe County above and beyond the basics of the solar farm. In order to do that in North Carolina, you need to have a development agreement. There were also discussions about increased maintenance responsibility. Again, you'll need to rely on a development agreement here in North Carolina to make that a possibility. Okay, so that was suggested as a requirement that going forward, new solar facilities be subject to a requirement to prepare a development agreement between the county and the applicant. That was supported by the Planning Board. Number 4, establishing limits on new solar farm sizes. There was a suggestion that we have some sort of limit, that we try to reach some kind of control on these facilities, whether that's a gross absolute acreage limit or a gross size limit for individual farms. What was put forward was a limit, at least in some districts, of 10 acres, but not applying a size limit in your 2 industrial districts. The thinking being that those solar providers who were seeking a larger facility might go to the industrial zoning districts to locate them, or might seek a rezoning to establish an industrial zoning district designation in order to accommodate that increased size limitation that we had set down. And that idea, that notion of having some kind of size limit on individual farms was supported. The idea of a county-wide cap on acres was not supported. Please, sir.
So by doing it that way, it essentially allows the citizens to voice their concern about an industrial district being put aside.
Correct. The legislative process that's associated with modifying your zoning map gives everybody an opportunity to come and share their thoughts without having to prove standing.
Correct. So it would be the same process as if it was zoned AR30 and they wanted to build a factory in that.
That's correct.
In that acreage.
That is correct.
Or if we wanted to put a mega site in that acreage or
Right.
whatever that looks like.
Exactly. Great question. Okay, we talked about new maximum height limits. The current height limit is 25 feet, and there was a suggestion about maybe taking that down to 20 feet as measured above grade. There was support on the part of the planning board for that. Uniform setback requirements. There was a suggestion of retaining the current 100-foot setback requirement from existing or approved residential developments. Planning board felt that that should be increased from 100 feet, which it is currently, to 500 feet. Okay, so that was their suggestion. That was not part of their recommendation. Again, their recommendation was to extend the moratorium. But I wanted to share that that was the input that we received on the 16th. In terms of vegetated buffer standards, increasing the vegetated buffer requirements, the screening around these facilities. There was a suggestion that we increase that to 50 feet, that we grow it to 3 rows of staggered evergreen plantings instead of 2, that's what the current standards are, that we establish a new minimum size at time of planting and a new expectation that new material be at least 20 feet tall, okay, so that it grow to the height of the maximum height of the solar facility. Finally, that we use native plant material. Planning board supported this. They would like to discuss a deeper buffer. It was their feeling that 50 feet was perhaps not enough, and they might like to see a deeper buffer. They did not give us a number in terms of what that should be. I'll also note for you, Planning Board suggested that this standard be applied retroactively to existing solar farms. You guys have about, I guess, 10 on the ground that either have been built or are approved. Planning Board would like to see these deeper buffer standards applied to the existing ones. Happy to talk about the ins and outs of the legality associated with that. It turns out that that is something that you can do if you choose to. Number 8, please.
Time frame on, will we put a time frame on those things, or is it just expected to?
That is something that we would want to discuss with you in greater detail. Can you establish a time frame? Yes. Should you establish a time frame is a different question. It is not uncommon to apply an additional deeper buffer standard when an applicant comes forward and seeks a change. I'd like to make this change to my site. Well, that's okay, great. We want you to come into compliance with the buffer requirements as part of the changes. Now, some local governments do establish a time frame. Typically, it's 3 years, but could be longer. I would not suggest anything shorter than that.
And then beyond that, to grow to a height of at least 20 feet, are we putting a time, is the recommendation to put a time frame on how quickly those items grow?
I'd suggest you not do that, lest your staff be out there measuring trees with a tape measure, which would be.
I'm not sure that we go out there and check a vegetative buffer at this point in the first place. So.
We're making some suggestions about how that might be done in a more efficient manner in a moment. But I would definitely advise not to put staff into a position of measuring plant height.
So we're saying that we want trees that are going to grow, or buffer that's going to necessarily grow? You have to plant a certain number of trees that are going to grow to this height?
Yes, absolutely. That the trees that you select for your screening material be trees that the landscape industry recognizes will grow to at least 20 feet at maturity.
I think that's the ought to grow. We don't know what height it's gonna get to,
don't
okay?
know when the good
As long
one's
as they
gonna sit
plant,
around or not.
as long as the required vegetation is planted.
I asked
I
the
think
question, but I
that-
think it's a valid question.
I do, it's good conversation, it is, and I think you knew the answer. Okay, you knew the answer, and other thing. It ought to grow there, we don't know if it ever get there or not, correct?
Well, we might even like it to be taller than 20 feet if conditions would support that. So, but 20 feet was felt to be a reasonable standard.
And then they're gonna grow different heights, and we're gonna have argument with that, so we're gonna have to deal with that when we get
Right,
there.
that's
okay?
correct. That's correct.
Meadows, Chairman Wiggs, may I ask a question?
Please do, and don't ask me, just butt in. Okay.
Let's go back just a bit,
Sure.
if you would.
Absolutely.
In regards to the setback, currently we have a 100-foot setback, correct?
From existing residential development, there is a 100-foot setback. From other forms of development, it is not that deep. It ranges anywhere from 30 feet to 50 feet. But you do have on your books now a 100-foot requirement when it's abutting existing residential development.
Okay, and you're saying that, correct me if I'm right or wrong here, that proposed would go from 100 feet setback to 500 feet? Is that what I heard?
I suggested that the 100-foot be carried forward. Your planning board believes that it should be deeper.
Final decision is what we want it to be.
It is y'all's decision. It's your purview
Okay.
to make
Some,
that
if it's
decision.
somewhere between that or a stage where it is when it comes to us, we can make that decision.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was also some discussion about additional screening when abutting residential development. Again, the idea was that folks seem to object to the appearance of these facilities, not necessarily their purpose or not necessarily their function, but rather their appearance. And thus, we talked about the possibility of an additional planting standard, maybe a berm, some other kind of requirement, not quite sure what that would amount to. It might be a menu of choices, but that there be a standard in place that requires additional screening from existing residential development. Planning board would like to revisit that and would like to have more discussion about that. And in their wisdom, that was their suggestion with respect to recommendation number 8. Add mitigation for loss of productive farmland. We talked a lot about this topic, and it is one that is difficult. It's difficult to measure, it's difficult to objectively calculate, and what does mitigation look like? Where we ultimately landed was a mitigation standard that requires payment by an applicant to the Agricultural Advisory Board or some other entity of a standard fee per acre of land that is in the current present use value program and would be converted to solar farm use as part of their application. And so there's more work that needs to be done with this concept. How much money, who gets the money, what are they supposed to do with the money? Those things need to be worked out. But the concept is, if there's land in present use value taxation that is converted from whatever it's doing now into solar farm use, that there be a per acre mitigation fee provided to the government for their use, assumedly for more farmland, better utilization of the existing farmland that we have.
Do you have any counties that have that in place in our county, in our state now?
I don't think that I don't know of any offhand. Now, I have not spent a lot of time researching other counties. This issue requires staff. It's going to require tracking. And you guys will have to justify what you're spending the money on. It's like any other sort of exaction. It's not an impact fee, but it's like a fee in lieu. And there'll be an expectation on the part of the General Assembly that you're spending the money in the manner that you said you would, in the places where you said you would. So there is some effort associated with that concept. Okay?
Well, I think you know, the use of farmland, which is leased to the developer, and even the bonding and the final use, to me appears to be a owner and a developer's decision into who they lease their land to. I do know, excuse me, that we need some protections in place, but the taking of what has been in my family as my farmland and to lease it is a personal decision.
Right.
So how do we control what the farmers lease their land for? Is a quite major question to me in terms of, I do know that whatever statutory requirements that we can put on it, but taking use out and using it for something else, I think Mr. Webb made some sense to me in some of the things he said, and so did Ms. Stallings, okay?
Sure.
All of them made sense to me in terms of maybe some of the things they might be opposed to, too. But I think that's a major question for us. Go ahead.
Indeed. Just because you can apply a mitigation requirement doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Indeed, indeed. And it's entirely possible that if we re-examine the zoning districts where these uses are allowed, you might find yourself in a place where it doesn't matter because it's not going to be AR30 land that comes into solar farm use.
I do think it's an interesting topic to kind of, because there is that topic, as was discussed, that there are programs that this money could be used towards.
That's right.
And I'm not opposed to discussing it.
Yeah, I think there's discussion there about what that could look like if other things don't necessarily.
Right.
It's a tool to have in the toolbox.
Absolutely.
My only question is, the Agricultural Advisory Board is just that, an advisory board. They don't have a bank to put money in. They don't have anybody that writes checks or that sends money out to
That's right.
anybody.
That's right.
And I have a problem. How you gonna charge a fee on land that you don't own? It still belongs to the farmer who decided to lease his land.
Understood.
So how we gonna profit from that when we don't actually own that, we don't own that land?
The impetus for all of this was to slow the loss of farmland by members of the stakeholder committee. That was the reason that this recommendation was floated out.
Well, I think maybe what's being proposed it's a lot of things that's being proposed we missed as it relates to when we did our UDO, that we missed. And it was it was new to us, and we have been amending our UDO as the need or as the occasion arose. That's where we are now, okay, in terms of what we need to do. And some of this could have been prevented. And I think you are headed into, right now, in turning us some of the legalities we might have.
That's right.
Go ahead.
That's right. We talked a lot about wildlife and wildlife corridors. There's a suggestion to require fences to maintain clearance off the ground of 12 inches, or inclusion of wildlife corridors across the narrow dimension of a facility. And Planning Board would like to think more about that as well. They did not support the notion of the 12-inch clearance. Keep in mind that's for ground-dwelling critters. It's not deer, it's other things. And this provision was drafted to allow the applicant to decide which of the two that they would use, and they could decide. Or they could have no fence at all, at which point this wouldn't be necessary. So, in that regard, we would put that decision on them. So, Planning Board would like to discuss that some more. A couple of the things that are on our list: demonstrating the path of electrical connection, suggesting a standard requiring an applicant to identify the location of where the electrical service is going to go. Where is it going to connect to the grid? Not on their site, on somebody else's site, okay? Because oftentimes the electric wires have to cross property to get to the transmission easement. So we want that clarified before they come in for an approval, so that we all understand and they have secured access to the transmission line, okay, as part of their due diligence. This was actually a suggestion made to us by the solar farm industry. They said this is a good standard for you guys to have in place, and we agree. Okay, 2 inspection requirements. Another source of a lot of discussion. I will comment for you that your current regulation anticipates your staff will inspect each and every solar facility in Edgecombe County quarterly. Okay, that's what your current standards require. I don't know if that's happening now. And I think there's some interesting questions to ask yourself about whether or not that's a good use of the resources that you have. What we would suggest is a third party do the inspections paid for by the applicant that include drone footage that are provided to the county
I accept that one. Go ahead.
on some sort of ongoing basis. The standard was drafted, proposed at 3 years. Planning board supports third-party inspection. They'd like to see it done every year, not every 3 years.
Makes sense.
As far as applying this standard to the existing facilities, that was also supported by your planning board, okay? New community benefit standards, I mentioned this earlier, and this is something that is in use in Halifax County. This idea that the solar farm provider make annual payments, that there's a trust fund or local hiring commitments or college scholarships, some sort of something that's done for the community for these things coming in. Who suggested this? The solar farm folks suggested this. Staff thinks it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. Halifax has history with it. It's worth doing. You need the development agreement in place in order to allow you to do this under state law. Okay? Planning board supported this concept. New performance guarantee requirements for maintenance. Okay? This sort of turns on how well are we maintaining the site, which is the other really kind of bone of contention among the people who live near these things. If you include a development agreement, then it's possible for us to do these maintenance performance guarantees, okay? If you don't, then we've got some more fancy legal footwork that we need to deal with, okay? Because you're not allowed to require performance guarantees for maintenance in North Carolina. You can do this through the development agreement. You cannot do it as a matter of ordinance standard, okay? Updating the decommissioning requirements. This has been a subject for discussion. When the solar farm use goes away, bring the site back to its pre-construction state. Now, a couple of years ago, North Carolina adopted new rules. Session Law 2023-147, hold on, let me give you the number. 2023-58. Every industrial scale solar farm operator in North Carolina must post a decommissioning plan with DEQ and has to post a bond with DEQ for money for that plan to be acted upon, should it be necessary. Okay, so this is before they come to you to get your local approval. They need NC DEQ approval of the decommissioning plan and acceptance of the financial guarantee. You guys can rely on that, and we would suggest the standards be revised to recognize Session Law 2023-58. Okay.
Do we have in the solar farms now that were here before that legislation was passed?
I believe you do. There's some weakness in your current decommissioning standard, which says that if the salvage value of the material is 0, then guess how much the performance guarantee has to be? 0.
And that was between the landowner and the...
No, that's part of the
our
special use permit approval that's issued by the county.
Okay.
If we do nothing else, that salvage value clause needs to be removed. If we do nothing else. Finally, increasing civil penalties. There was a suggestion that we increase the penalty amount for solar farm operators who fail to maintain the maintenance, fail to maintain the screening. which, we can certainly discuss, supplement your fee schedule. As you guys know, those fees do not come to the county, they go to the school system. So it's not like it's going to be a windfall or that you'll be able to use that money to do anything.
But if it helps the school system, it helps the county.
It would help the school system.
It helps the county.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of maybe the suggestion of going to a private inspection firm, how do we, for compliance of that inspection, how do we do that?
So what my suggestion would be, first off, there are numerous firms across the state who do these kinds of inspections. So this is a cottage industry that exists. Suggest you have 2 or 3 firms on retainer who, when receive funds from you, which are paid for, again, by the applicant, they go out and execute the inspection and then provide that information to you. So that's an ongoing contract. I suggest having at least 2 providers so that you don't have a conflict issue there.
And I guess, and at that point, how do we force how do we get the solar farm in compliance?
Oh, what happens when the...
How do we get them in
Right.
compliance? Okay.
So, how it works today is you use your enforcement provisions to notify a solar farm operator that they are out of compliance with the code. They have 30 days to appeal that decision or make it right. And then you pursue the usual remedies that
We
are...
can't shut them down. I'm talking about how do we get them to clean it up, do whatever it is that they...
One thing that we can consider as part of a development agreement situation, if you were to require a development agreement to be in place to operate a solar farm, and somebody failed to heed their inspection report and didn't address the violation that existed, then they would be in breach of your development agreement, at which point you could rescind their authority to operate.
Okay. More to come as we look through it. Go ahead. Okay.
A couple other things that are just more kind of development code hygiene. I'm going to talk about all of these items except B. I want to come back to B. A through G, these are basic aspects that either came up in discussion or that should be considered as part of any effective set of regulations. Obviously, updating your definitions so that they're current and they address the things that are in your regulation. Clarify that deviations from the dimensional requirements stand unless altered via a condition of approval or a variance. So being clear about that. There was discussion about pollinator-friendly ground cover, and that ground cover maintenance activities within the solar farm be conducted in a pollinator-friendly manner. Okay, what does that mean? I am not a biologist, I do not know. I think it means allowing plants to grow and mowing once a year or once or twice a year. Not sure we can research that as we move into it if that's something that you guys decide to follow. Now, stormwater. Yes, the state does stormwater. You're not in the business of doing stormwater. Can you require that solar farms be constructed so that any stormwater runoff leaving the site does so at a non-erosive velocity? Yes, you can. You can absolutely make that requirement. And will have to attest to you and show you how that's going to be achieved so that I don't get sedimentation or erosion on my property because somebody's put in a solar farm next to me. Okay? And that will not impact the state issuing any kind of stormwater plans. There's no extra effort for you. F is a future proof. What we're seeing now are these kinds of facilities, including battery storage. Okay, so that's a coming thing. Folks are putting in battery storage of the electricity that's generated on site for use in the grid at some later date. If somebody has a battery storage component, we would suggest that we had some standards to deal with that. So we would suggest incorporating some battery storage as an accessory use provision in your new regulation. Finally, a neighborhood meeting. If an applicant seeks to establish one of these via conditional rezoning process, that there be a neighborhood meeting conducted by the applicant before the application is submitted. Gives the opportunity for people in the area to learn more about what's proposed, gives the applicant an opportunity to know how the people in his area or her area feel about the proposal, etc. So just a good practice. And it all happens before the application's submitted. Y'all aren't there. This is not your meeting. It's the applicant's meeting. And they explain as part of their application how that meeting went and what was said. Okay? Last topic is B. This was something that came up based on our discussion about maximum sizes and caps. And that's the possibility of a separation distance requirement. That no solar farm could be established within 1,000 linear feet of another existing solar farm use. It's listed here as an idea. It's not suggested as a recommendation. And I just wanted to leave it in the list because it is something that came up and for your consideration, whether you want us to move forward with an idea like this or not. It is not uncommon to see minimum separation distance requirements for utility features. Telecommunication facilities generally have those kinds of standards. You might decide you want it, you might decide you don't. It's something for you to think about. A couple more slides. I appreciate y'all's patience. Planning Board asked for public comment. Several of the folks who spoke have been here tonight. Support for extending the moratorium, which you heard again tonight from every single person who spoke. There was support for pollinator rules, operating the facility in accordance with pollinator practices. Suggestion that the wildlife corridors needed to be wider than 36 inches. Some residents feel pushed out by solar, that they're coming everywhere, and that the county should be investing in young people, not in solar. Those are points that we've heard this evening. There's also the point that the planning board presentation and the whole process has been inappropriately one-sided against the solar industry. That point has also been made before you tonight. Members of the industry didn't necessarily support the suggested zoning district changes. There was a suggestion that bigger setbacks mean bigger solar farms and that we should be focusing on screening instead. There was support on the part of the solar industry for the development agreement, the community benefit agreement concept. There was a suggestion that solar farm owners should provide notice to the county when ownership changes, assumedly because there was some sort of failure to comply with the maintenance requirements. And then there was also a suggestion for quarterly self-reporting, which my sense on that is if your staff doesn't have time to do it now, because it's on your books now and it's not happening, I don't know that that's a road we should go down. I think maybe an annual reporting is probably more manageable for the world that we've got. And so that brings us to, I'm happy to say, my last slide. 3 options. We can, 1, prepare the UDO text amendment, if you wish, based on current state law. That has some limitations on our ability to remove solar farms from the AR30 zoning district based on Senate Bill 587. And if you want to talk about legislation, I'm happy to do that. But right now, that's not something that we can do given the state of the current law.
If the current legislation passes, what does it do?
So, Senate Bill 587 has passed the Senate. It has not yet passed the House. If it passes the House and is ratified by the governor, then the limitations on our ability to go back in and change the zoning district designations for these facilities is removed. And we have no more prior owner consent issues that we have to grapple with. When will that happen? When will we know? Don't know. Maybe October 1st. A lot of the bills that are in circulation right now anticipate an effective date of October 1st, 2025. I don't know if they're telegraphing to us what they think, but in the recent past, we've seen the General Assembly continue to stay in session past the new year. So we have no reason to expect this year will be any different. If we decided to prepare the UDO text amendments based on the current state law, we would go prepare an initial draft for your review in August. We'd go to Planning Board in September, and we'd be back before you with those regulations, draft regulations in November. Option 2 is extend the moratorium and see what happens with state law. Give the state law an opportunity to settle with respect to Senate Bill 587. meet again with the planning board on their recommendations. Remember, 8, 9, and 10, they wanted to talk more about those and think some more about that. And then draft some text amendments after we know where we are with state law. And then, of course, there's option 3, which is some other approach, something else that you guys might like to do. And I don't know if staff has a recommendation on this. No matter what option you guys choose, if you're interested in my participation, I'll absolutely be here every step of the way, if that's something that you want.
In terms of, do you have a recommendation, Wes?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think based on the uncertainty of what that state legislation might do, as well as I think it would be wise to give our staff and planning board to further explore some of those items that have been mentioned, will recommend that we extend the moratorium for a year.
Go ahead, you go ahead. Go right ahead.
Go right.
You wouldn't be voting on that tonight. You would need to call a public hearing
That's
to
correct.
consider that. So if, you would follow the manager's recommendation, the move would be to call a public hearing in the next meeting.
What is, go right ahead.
I recommend that I make a motion that we call a public hearing to extend the moratorium
That'll be for August, at our next meeting.
at our next meeting.
Second.
We have, you get that? Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, what we have done, ladies and gentlemen, we've extended the moratorium.
No,
And
sir, just call.
We've called for a public hearing, and even once the planning board has made their recommendations, those of you that are in agreement, it comes to us for final agreement, for final decision. Those things that you see or like and whatever recommendation they're made, you can still come to this meeting and oppose them. They are advisory also, okay? Our planning board is an advisory board, and we don't have to do what they say. And sometimes we don't, okay? Okay. Okay.
If I could just say one thing.
Go ahead.
I think that was one of the best presentations on code that I've ever heard in my life. So thank you for that. It's very thorough, and you can tell that you listened to all sides of it. And I think the main thing that I took away from it, and the frustration that I'm hearing from a lot of citizens now, is about the SUP process and going through that special use permit process. And I think you hit the nail on the head with what our citizens are telling us. We've expressed an opinion to you and loudly, and you haven't been able to listen to us. And being able to tell them that we're not able to listen to you is a frustrating process.
Well, we thought we listened, but it had no standing because we were quasi-judicial, and they had experts, and the citizens didn't have any certified expertise. The court looked at it and said we were due to do it. And I think, as I read the court's opinion, there was some justice in it as it related to what the court could have done. Okay? As it relates to what that court could have done, there was some justice in that decision. Okay? As I reviewed it, just my unqualified opinion.
All I say to that is it's just, people think of a UDO as kind of this
Right.
boring document that doesn't really affect our county. It's a living, breathing document
It
that's
is.
affecting every decision that we make at this county. So it's very important for us to be involved in how this document is shaped.
It is, and it becomes a legal document when it gets to the court, and we have to be kind of guided by our attorney in terms of the things that we do and we won't have to do that with some of the recommendations that are being made. We won't have to do it. It's just, we didn't do the things that we should have done 12 years ago to get to where we are now, the things that we need to do with our ordinance. And we have heard you, and we understand your concerns on all sides of this issue. And what we want to come out of this is the best ordinance that we can get, that will not satisfy all of you anyway. But we will do the best with it. Even when we make those decisions, we're going to be some opposition. But that's what we are here for. I can't satisfy all of you. If I get 50% of you, I'm doing a good job. So that's where we will be.
I go to court.
Well, if we go to court, we might not be on this wrong side of it. Moving on.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, not to belabor this, but I just want to stress, we do public engagement in a lot of ways. But I must say that this process and this group of folks who gave of their time to come to these stakeholder meetings is one of the best ways I've seen this process play out. Because at the table were people of differing opinions, different ideas. They came to the table with different things as a priority of a concern to them. So if it's okay, I think it would be worthy of asking those that are here tonight to stand. So that we
Please
can-
stand, please, stakeholders, please stand up. All of it, those were the stakeholders. And even those of you that spoke before, your comments were already included, which was good. They had picked up from those things that you said were not included. They picked it up we were going to see that anyway, okay, whether you appeared or not. I think that was one of the good things that came out. They heard you. You were heard at that meeting, okay? And it's good to have opposition. Opposition is good. I don't want it when I run for office, but it makes us.
And I'm the only one that gets it?
But it makes us better elected officials. We hear you. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much. Now, moving on. Other business, Mr. Evans.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows.
As you'll recall, at your last meeting, we brought before your attention and consideration of changes to our fees and planning and inspections. You asked that we bring that, table that and bring it back to you to share some comparison with surrounding and similarly sized counties. So in your agenda packet, you have both the two fee schedules with the current fee and proposed changes or additions. But you also, behind that, have in your packet a table that shows our fee schedule compared to surrounding and similarly sized counties. Certainly, Mr. Spell is here tonight if you have any specific questions for him. I think what you'll see when you review that is, there are differences from county to county, but I think even with the proposed changes, we would be within the range of those counties. Some counties would still be, their fee would be less than ours, some would, some cases be more than ours, but that is for your review. And pending any questions that you might have, I do recommend that you approve the fee schedule changes as presented.
Any questions from the board? If not, is there a motion to approve the fee schedule?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Boswell, second by Ms. Powell. Questions?
Just, my only thing is, I know that department operates lean, and I know you work very hard, Irvin, and I appreciate all that you do. But when we start increasing fees, the level of service also, I feel like, has to go up proportionally. When you double a fee, you need to make sure that you're delivering on doubling the fee. So when we're talking about raising something from $200 to $500 when you're submitting an application, I expect some proportionate response back in what those are.
Point well taken.
And that sounds like a motion to give him another staff person.
I'll take that. I'm sure Jeremy will take that.
All in favor, let it be known by the vote side aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, it is approved. Moving as fast as we can. Moving on, Mr. Evans.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Item B is public hearing for financing capital projects. As you know, that we're proposing proceeding with the financing of a list of capital projects. You've directed us to continue with our due diligence on that. Since we presented that information and list to you, we've discussed our financing plan with the staff at the Local Government Commission in preparation for our appearance before them to get their approval. We've also published a solicitation of bids from lending institutions, which their responses are due back on July 22nd. And the next key step will be to hold a public hearing. So I recommend that you call for that public hearing to be held at your August 4th meeting.
Motion
So moved. Second.
called by Ms. Motion by Ms. Harris, second by Ms. Powell. Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, it is approved. What did I say? I messed up your name there?
I think she heard it.
She got it, she got it. Okay, well, one of the two. Next.
Next is a recommendation for an update to our human services bylaws. You'll see that these are relatively minor changes for minor corrections, clarification, and some formatting updates. There's no substantive structural changes to the bylaws. I do recommend that you approve the updated bylaws as presented.
Motion?
Motion.
Second.
You're gonna have to get them names, because someone will mess them up calling them, okay? The clerk requested me to call these names. You got it? Okay. Questions? All in favor, let me know by the voting sign aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, it is approved. Next.
Item D, here I'm requesting, your approval of a job description for an EMS training officer. This position is needed to improve operations and emergency services. It will be added to the compensation plan at grade E06A. A currently budgeted position will be repurposed for this new position, therefore no additional funding is needed in emergency services budget. I recommend that you approve the new job description as well as the revision to our county's compensation plan.
Motion?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let me know by the voting sign aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, is approved. Next.
As you know, North Carolina General Statutes allows you to award a retiring deputy, a retiring officer, his or her service weapon. It specifically states you may do so at a price determined by you as the governing body. Sheriff Atkinson has requested that consideration be given for retiring Captain Joseph Cofield to show the county's appreciation for his exemplary service and to provide a memento for that service. I recommend that you approve the transfer of his service weapon at a price of $1 upon the retirement of Captain Joseph Cofield.
Motion.
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, it is approved. Next.
If I could just make.
Go right ahead.
There is a reception tomorrow for him at the sheriff's office.
Okay.
That we were all invited to.
What
Was
time
it-
is it tomorrow tonight?
It's the 7th, I think.
The 7th
Today
is the
is the
night.
7th.
No, sorry. It's the 9th.
No,
It's the
no.
9th. It's the
Wednesday.
9th. Sorry, Wednesday.
From 12
What
to
time?
12 to 2.
12 to.
Moving on. Next.
Next, you have for your consideration a resolution to honor Mr. Taekwon Lewis. I'd like to invite Ms. Natalie Best to come to the podium to present this resolution for your consideration.
Resolution to honor Taekwon Lewis. Whereas Taekwon Lewis, born January 30th, 1995 in Tarboro, North Carolina, graduated from Tarboro High School, where he was part of 3 consecutive state football championship teams and earned Associated Press All-State honors in his senior season. And whereas he continued his football career at Ohio State University, achieving national acclaim, which includes playing in 53 games, which is 36 starts, helping lead the Buckeyes to the College Football Playoff National Championship in 2014, a Sugar Bowl in 2014, a Fiesta Bowl in 2015, a Cotton Bowl in 2017, 2 Big Ten titles, and finishing his collegiate career with 112 tackles, 36.5 tackles for loss, 23.5 sacks, ranking 5th in school history, and earning first-team All-Big Ten honors in both 2016 and 2017. And whereas in the 2018 NFL Draft, Taekwon was selected in the second round, 64th overall, by the Indianapolis Colts, where he has since become a respected defensive end wearing jersey number 94. And whereas Taekwon has completed 8 seasons in the NFL, including a 2-year contract extension in March 2024, and recorded 119 total tackles, 15 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and 1 interception as of the end of 2024 season. And whereas Taekwon Lewis has made Tarboro, Edgecombe County, and the state of North Carolina proud through his exemplary performance, leadership, and commitment both on and off the field, now therefore be it resolved by the Edgecombe County Board of Commissioners that the board acknowledges Taekwon Lewis as an exemplary ambassador for Edgecombe County, celebrating his journey from local student athlete to professional NFL player. The board shall present to Taekwon Lewis the key to Edgecombe County, a symbolic token of our enduring appreciation and respect for his accomplishments. County staff are directed to prepare and authorize a presentation of the resolution and key during a special ceremony on July 11, 2025. And a copy of this resolution shall be included in the official minutes of the Edgecombe County Board of Commissioners and become a permanent expression of the county's esteem and recognition of Taekwon Lewis, adopted this day, what day is it?
July the 7th.
7th day of July 2025. Leonard Wiggins, Board Chair, and Tammy Faison, Clerk to the Board. And I do have a few flyers that have, so Taekwon is having his community weekend this weekend in Edgecombe County. On Friday, July 11th, he's having a 7-on-7 showcase game at Tarboro High School from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can register at www.taekwonlewis.com. And on Saturday, he is having at Indian Lake a community cleanup, cars and coffee, and a community day from 10 to 4. So they're asking for you to bring one canned good or book for entry into the community day. And the key to the county will be presented on Friday, the 11th, at Tarboro High School.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions?
There's just one connection,
Ain't got no key.
correction on that second whereas. If you talk to Taekwon and all of his alumni, they're gonna say that as you read, he continued his football career at
The Ohio State University. I thought about that
And they
after.
put that in bold, all caps, right?
Which is not part of the motion. All in favor, let it be known by the vote sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed, hearing none, that motion carries without the.
Give it a little more emphasis there.
It did, always in order. Moving on, Mr. Evans.
All right. Item G on your agenda is consideration of capital project ordinance for North Edgecombe capital project. As you're aware, the county and the school system, we've been jointly awarded a grant of $62 million from the Needs-Based Public Schools Capital Fund for the renovation and construction of the North Edgecombe School of Innovation. The grant requires a 5% match to be provided by the county, which we plan to secure via financing. We anticipate going before the LGC in the spring of '26 to seek approval for the borrowing. In the meantime, there are pre-construction costs necessary to move the project forward. Therefore, I recommend that you approve the attached capital projects ordinance as well as the accompanying reimbursement resolution as presented.
Motion,
So moved.
Second.
questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed, hearing none, it is approved. Next.
Item H is regarding the Sheriff's Highway Safety Program. The Sheriff's Office, they've received a grant award from the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program to continue to designate a full-time deputy who addresses traffic collisions, speeding complaints, and other issues related to traffic safety and education. These grants are intended to provide the related startup costs, vehicle equipment, et cetera, and to create these positions. Positions are then to be absorbed over a 4-year period. The match and eventual total funding for these positions will be drawn from the sheriff's already approved salary line. I recommend that you approve the attached resolution to accept the grant as presented.
Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Questions?
The only question I have, I know we kind of keep re-upping these grants.
Yes.
But after the end of it, we have to make if that doesn't get renewed, say after 4 years, we have to make a determination on if we're maintaining that
That's
position or not.
correct.
That's what that 4-year draw period is.
That's correct. So far, it has, we've gone through the 4-year period and now it has restarted.
Because this just started the previous, we did this 4 years ago. This is the renewal of that.
That's correct.
4 years.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye. All opposed, hearing none. We're down to appointments. This is the list, is that correct?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Will one motion do it?
Sure. Yes, sir.
You,
Second.
questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye. All opposed, hearing none. All those for reappointments and appointments are approved. After list and releases for review, Mr. Evans, and
There are none this month, sir.
contracts for review and approval, what, you've got them in your book, in your in your agenda. Are there any questions?
I do want to point out, Mr. Chairman, we did add one. You should have a copy like this at your place.
Go right ahead.
You'll see the one in red. That is the one we're asking that you add for consideration. That is for Waterline Extension on Eagles Road, which is funded by a grant through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. You'll see the information about the others. Those 6 or 7 down at the bottom are for your information. I recommend that you approve as presented.
Any questions before I get a motion? If not, a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, they are approved. Departmental, is there anything in these reports that you need to bring to our attention? I don't see Ms. Barfield here today.
Yes, sir. She had a family emergency tonight. You do have the water and sewer update, the monthly financial summary, Ms. Barfield's provided in your agenda packet. This is about where we normally are this time of the year. Though it says through June 30th, there are still both expenditures and revenue that will be paid and received that will be tied back to this previous fiscal year. I do want to note, I know it's all, it's usually an interest of yours to see where we are with the sales tax. So that sales tax report is provided as well. We've gotten the projected receipts up through May. That $950,772.15, that's what's projected to be received. We've not actually received that, but they let us know in advance. So you'll see, based on that second page of that report, that does close the gap some on the difference of where we are this year compared to the same time last year. You'll remember last report, a couple reports before, we were $300,000 to $400,000. So it's been running better. So we hope to close out the year at least making budget for our sales tax.
Any questions on any of this before we move on?
What kind of things is this sales tax coming from? Because people all the time is like, well, they don't pay taxes. Well, sales tax, people, because they don't own property, they still buy things
Absolutely.
and pay taxes. They pay sales tax.
Yeah, there's not too many things to purchase that there's not a sales tax. Grocery store, buy a candy bar from the gas station, so many things, sales tax is
I can't
collected.
buy from the gas station, you pay 2 times.
You pay 2 times at the pump and if you go inside.
Yeah, the Pepsi you
I
buy
try
from
not
the
to go
city.
inside.
Moving on, managers reports, anything to be brought to our attention in there?
I do want to, you have the major events and updates, workforce development indicators, the TDA financial report. I do want to draw your attention to the update on the Edgecombe Works Career Campus. You'll recall that this is the building that the county now owns just across from what was the Fountain Correctional Center, Fountain Park. We've had some activity there, so we're grateful. If you haven't seen it in person, we have a new sign on the building and at the road identifying it as the Edgecombe Works Career Campus. I want to thank Stan Liverman, our maintenance director, for getting that sign up and overseeing a lot of other things that have taken place inside and outside the building. Also, Jason Webb, our CIO, who's overseen some technology upgrades. You'll see that you have a table in here, and I just wanted you to see, as you recall, we were able to purchase this building because of a grant from the state that came through the community college. Again, great partners with the community college. That grant was originally $2.5 million. Because it sat in the bank for a while, it accumulated interest. So it took the grant available a little over $2.7 million. So that allowed us to be able to purchase the building. As you know, we negotiated the price of the building down because HVAC units had been stolen from the building and was unoccupied for some time. All of those units have been replaced, fencing around those HVAC units. Some IT upgrades, as I mentioned, other things in the building, signage, security cameras. In fact, there were 3 HVAC units that were on top of the building that were not replaced because they were still there. They didn't get those. But Stan identified one of those was having some issues, and so we had enough money available to go ahead and replace those 3. Those 3 are being replaced now. So will be all new HVAC units. We've had what we call a soft launch of the building. In other words, we've not made a grand ribbon cutting or anything, but we wanted the building to be in use as much as possible. So we've had some of our partners to use the building, Rocky Mount OIC. They've been using it some this summer for a youth summer camp that they are doing, and that will be going through August the 8th, I believe it is. Also, one of our nonprofit partners, One Harvest Life, they use it on a day to do a mini food pantry. If you've seen people in communities, they will set up these little structures to put food in where people can come by and get them. They had young people in the building on that day, and they built those. They built 8 or 9 of those to go around in the community. The community college will be using it for their retreat this fall, and we're working on some other things. So we still hope to be able to get some additional grant funding to put more equipment in it, but it's usable now. And so just wanted you to be aware that we're trying to make some good use of that building.
That was gonna be my question. How could a wood part of the community be able to use it for things?
Well, let me say, so ultimately, the building belongs to the county, so it's you all's decision. Our idea has been, we call it the Edgecombe Works Career Campus, because ultimately, we want it to be used by us and our partners who are in some way helping people get the skills that they need to get a job and keep a job. We think that's the primary purpose of it. Now, we have used it, our staff, we've used it in some cases for some training things that we need. I forgot to mention Antoine and his staff, they used it for some training out there a few weeks ago. And so that's the primary use of it. My recommendation would be that we not get it so bogged down with just general community use that it's hard for us to use it for that purpose. Again, the building is new to us, and as I said, we're doing a soft launch with it. So I think, there's still some opportunity for us to decide the highest and best use for the building. So that's an update on that. There's information in your packet regarding an update on the federal budget bill. This is a little bit outdated now, because since this was put in your packet and sent out, as you know, the Senate approved their version of the budget. It went back to the House, and now it's been signed by the President. And so that budget bill is now been acted into law. I think it's still early to understand exactly what the impacts will be for us as an organization, as well as for our citizens. We know that they've been added work requirements in the Medicaid program, in the SNAP program. Most people know it as food stamp program. The work requirements have been expanded, so more people will be required to show that they're either working, volunteering up to a certain number of hours per month. And I know Ms. Battle is here, and some of her staff, that will be just more things that our staff will have to review and certify. Something else that we need to be mindful of is that it caps the amount of Medicaid funding available to states. And North Carolina only somewhat recently expanded Medicaid, that is, increased the income eligibility so more people could qualify, more so working adults could qualify. This cap that they will put on it will likely mean that our state will have to decide, will they continue to offer this expanded Medicaid or not. I think our General Assembly, they've not really dove into that yet, so they will have some decisions they will need to make. Another thing and this bill is, 800 pages or so, it's a lot of stuff in it, but just focus on mainly the things that may affect us or our citizens. Currently, the federal government provides a 50% cost share in administering food stamps, or SNAP. So every time one of our employees taking, say, a food stamp application, 50% of their salary for that time is reimbursed by by the federal government through the state, that is being trimmed back to 25%. Again, it will be a decision for our General Assembly to make as to whether or not our state will pick up that cost, or whether that or whether the county is going to have to pick up that cost. So, of what we know of this legislation, there's still a lot unknown. We'll continue to monitor it as best as we can. The North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, they've done a great job of helping to keep us informed, as well as the National Association of Counties. They've both done a really good job of trying to help us, keep us informed as best as they can. So those are the two things I wanted to mention in particular in the manager's report, but happy to answer any questions that you have about anything.
Any questions of the manager? Anything from commissioners?
I hate to miss the Taquan Lewis event on Friday, but I'll be leaving for the National Association of County Commissioners in Philadelphia. And those are the two highlights I understand that are going to be for our North Carolina Association caucus. So hopefully when I come back, and our national association will give us the most recent updates. So hopefully I'll have some more information to share with you when I return.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Go ahead.
I think it's an appropriate time, and I know that we don't know the answer with the state yet, and we got to figure that out on these reimbursement things, because that's going to be a large ask, is to do a deep dive into that budget. Because I've looked at it, it's very complicated, it's very hard to understand what is actually being paid, who's being reimbursed, how it's being reimbursed, how all of that works, and I feel like that's going to be asked of us as a result of this bill. So I think it's a time that we do a good review of how that all is working, how those reimbursements are working, and I think that's internal and external. So that would be my suggestion from a high level finance standpoint as we look at that. What impact does that potentially have on us as a county if the state says this is all on you now?
Right.
How is this being reimbursed now?
What it would cost.
Yeah, how are we accounting for it now? First
Right.
off, is the main question that I want to ask, and then going forward, how are we accounting for it from that point? So I think that starts at a staff level, and I think that we bring in some people to help us kind of dive into what that process looks like.
Be proactive.
Sure. And
Very
you know,
proactive in what
sound
that
like
looks
it.
like.
you know, as far as the reimbursement percentage for SNAP program, the state has a very prescribed process, and Ms. Battle and her staff are very much used to using it. There's a form, I used to know what it is, 1571? Is that it? Are you impressed that I
I'm glad you remember.
I thought I might have been calling out an old locker number.
And that counts. She's impressed.
I'm trying. So they have a very prescribed process. They have to submit that. Every staff member has to fill out their piece, and then that collective is submitted every month.
And you said, oh, we have to submit that every month to get paid?
Yes.
sir.
Okay.
So, staff time is documented on day sheets. They have to complete a day sheet using codes that are fed into the 1571. And we have an employee who does that. He gets the day sheets every month. She takes the information, feeds it into the 1571, uploads it to the state, and they reimburse us based on the time that the employee spent performing a certain task and the code that's associated with that task. And then there's a fee, an amount of money that is associated with that code. So like Mr. Evans said, it's a very complicated, complex formula that they use, and I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just know they use the codes, and that's how we get reimbursed. The 50% for our food and nutrition staff, we get 75% reimbursement for our Medicaid staff, and 50% for administration.
Oh, that's done on a daily basis?
Has to be
Day
tracked.
sheets are completed daily. They have to be turned in a certain time of the month. The 1571 that is used to pull the money down is submitted monthly.
So we can look back.
Go ahead.
I feel like there's a way in that process for us to kind of say, this is our impact if you reduce this 25%, if you reduce
yeah.
this 100%.
Oh, right,
To
yeah.
take those numbers and say, and then
Based on-
take that to our lobbyist and say, look, this is our impact.
Right, and what I was going to say is that we can look back historically. We can look back last year and say, of the 50% we got reimbursed last year for the SNAP program, if we only got half, this is what it would be. You never know exactly what it's going to be because you don't know how many clients you got coming in and applying, so on and so forth. But we can
At least gives
easily,
you an idea.
we can easily look back and see. That's a good point.
And I remember in 2007 when the association worked so hard to get Medicaid off of counties. That was 2007, so we're talking about 18 years now. And I remember specifically, it cost the county over $6 million
Yeah, that was a big,
a year for Medicaid
before the state took.
before the state took.
It was, yeah, it was.
And
Go ahead, go
This
ahead.
is a different topic, so if we want to talk, anyone else wants to talk on that?
Go ahead.
The other topic is, I'll keep harping on it, but I think that was the best code discussion that I think we've ever had, and I think we need to look at that across our UDO. Because we're seeing so many different uses, we're seeing so many different applications, so many different people that are coming to us and saying, we want to do this, we want to build this. And I don't know if they're coming to us with, maybe they found out that there's a loophole in our code where they can get things through that maybe we need to address. And so just doing a little bit more deeper dive into what that looks like for us, maybe having some hearings, maybe having a special session with our board about kind of what we want to see for that. And I think in that conversation, and I've had this conversation with county employees and with citizens, I think it's a repurpose of our county plan. What is our growth plan for the county? Where do we see growth? How do we want to grow? And then you tailor all of that kind of works together. And that's a large conversation, but I think it's time to revisit that process.
Sure, absolutely.
Any other commissioner comments? Hearing none, Mr. Peters? At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we schedule a closed session to discuss personnel matters and economic development matters. Thank you for your patience and your attendance today. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, let it be known by the voting sign aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, we'll now be going to close. What did you, say it
Motion to
again?
adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, let me know my vote, saying aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
There's a long